Many characters in Elden Ring are blind. So far, I've identified 27 characters who are blind, and that list is by no means complete. Some of these individuals are naturally blind. Some have had their eyes gouged out, but others have purposely blinded themselves. Why? Because there is a power one can use once they have been deprived of their regular eyesight. The power to see with the third eye. What can one see with this third eye? I think that the third eye can see fate. The third eye, also called the mind's eye or inner eye, is an invisible eye usually depicted as located on the forehead, and it provides perception beyond ordinary sight. I think we see depictions of the third eye in the game. On the Fire Prelate's helm and the Carrion Preceptor's Mask of Confidence, on Azur and Lusat's Glintstone crowns, on Godwyn's forehead, on the forehead of the Jar Shamans and the Ancestral Follower Shamans, and most obviously, in Saint Trina's torch. I think the reason why there's so much third eye symbolism is because in this fantasy world, the third eye is a real thing that exists. FromSoft has done this before. Bloodborne introduced the concept of eyes on the inside. The item Third Umbilical Cord, also known as the Cord of the Eye, is used to gain insight and, so they say, eyes on the inside. The cord's description also mentions how no one remembers what eyes on the inside truly entails, but I think in this game, Elden Ring, we can figure it out. The concept of the mind's eye first appeared in English in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, where he tells us that one of the three men dwelling in a castle was blind and could only see with the eyes of his mind, namely, those eyes with which all men see after they have become blind. Upon becoming blind, you must use your mind's eye, aka third eye, to see. For the characters who are naturally blind or forced to become blind, they learn to see this way out of necessity. For the characters who purposefully blind themselves, I think they're doing so because they want to see with the third eye. But why? What's so useful about seeing with the third eye? In many cultures in the history of the world, the opening of one's third eye allows one to see in a new way. It's associated with becoming more spiritually attuned, gaining a heightened awareness, and a deeper intuitive understanding of one's connection to something greater. In this game, I think the opening of the third eye grants one the ability to see fate. Many blind individuals are connected to the concepts of fate and prophecy. The Ancestral Follower Shamans have their eyes closed and have a third eye painted on their forehead. Traditionally, shamans are people who can access the spiritual world, enter altered states of consciousness, and who practice divination, that is, the ability to scry, make prophecies, and predict the future. The verb form of divination is to divine. The finger eater crones don't have eyes, and Enya tells us she divines the words of the two fingers. Erdtree prophets like Corrin wear the prophet's blindfold, and they make prophecies such as foreseeing the burning of the Erdtree. The flame of Rune is anathema to the Erdtree, but prophets sometimes glimpse it within the faith all the same. More like glimpse it within the fate, in my opinion. Hyetta, too, is blind, but we feed her fingerprint grapes so that she can see the distant light, which cannot be seen with the naked eye. After we have become the three fingers, we touch Hyetta in the middle of her forehead, where her third eye would be. This act causes her regular eyes to melt. After this, she is able to touch the words of the three fingers and divine them for us. Oracle envoys have their eyes covered. They too are blind. Oracles are mediums who provide prophecies. A prophecy is a prediction of the future. One's fate is one's future. Thus, the oracles are those who can see fate. All these individuals have two things in common. They are blind, and they have the ability to divine fate. Corrin's prophet blindfold directly connects the concepts of blindness and prophecy together. It says, "Why hesitate if the path leading to the future is clear? Just close your eyes and walk." By closing your eyes, you can see the path to the future. The Beast Champion helm echoes this idea. The beasts, their eyes and ears covered, represent an oath: see nothing, hear nothing, doubt nothing, and carry on along the path set in stone. The path to the future is fate. Corrin's blindfold is telling us that you can see fate when you are blind. The prophets have the ability to foretell big important prophecies about the world, like the burning of the Erd Tree. But Corrin's prophet blindfold takes the notion of seeing the future to the extreme. It suggests that when you have complete faith in the future, in fate, then you don't even need to see to be able to walk. Perhaps if you believe in fate this much, you don't need to see to fight either. Many enemies we fight are blind. Moreover, many have purposefully blinded themselves. These enemies don't just blunder around, they're serious opponents. In fact, many of them are the strongest fighters of their factions. The Fire Knights are under the personal command of Mesmer. The Fire Prelates lead the Fire Monks. The Azula Beastmen who have their eyes covered are also those with the fanciest armor set, like they're of a higher rank. It seems like the game is suggesting that not only can you fight while blind, but this ability is desired and is used by some of the strongest enemies in the game. I think these individuals don't need to rely on their regular old two eyes to see, because they are relying on something else to help guide their movements. I think they're basically Jedi. In A New Hope, Obi-Wan gives Luke a helmet to blind him, and instructs him to use the Force to block the laser shots.
This time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
With the blast shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them.
If it were possible to see into the future, you could know what your opponent's next moves would be, and therefore gain an edge in battle. This is a huge strategic advantage. No wonder these blind warriors seem to be of a higher rank. They're essentially wielding fate as a weapon.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
You mean it controls your actions?
Partially, but it also obeys your commands.
Doesn't it make sense now? How a blind swordsman was able to seal away an ancient god, a god that was rot itself? Perhaps the flowing sword he used was not just a curved sword or a flowing river, but the flowing current of fate which guided him. While I don't think that the Force and fate are equivalent, I think that this is the best way to explain why and how these warriors are fighting so well while blind, and why they have chosen to be blind. They are following the path of fate, which they can see with their inner eye. Why hesitate? Just close your eyes and swing. I think the third eye is not just some abstract idea in the game. I think it's something in our head which we've discussed before. I think the third eye, aka the mind's eye, aka the inner eye, is the rune. Technically, it may be more accurate to say that the rune occupies the third eye. The real third eye may be the black hole that exists in the center of the runes, which we can think of as the pupil which sees fate. We can directly tie runes to fate with one simple piece of evidence: the guidance of grace. The runes are grace, per their descriptions. The guidance of grace is meant to guide the tarnished to the path they are meant to follow. Path equals fate, as we said before. Thus, the guidance of grace, the guidance of the runes, we could say, guide us to our fate. We can also tie the runes to eyes. The runes look like eyes. Runes are floating in the eye sockets of the skulls with glowing eyes that drop Golden Rune 1. Marika's rune was placed into Mesmer's eye, and Leida's rune is an unalloyed light that has never dwelled in an eye, though it sounds like it was meant to. The runes are grace, and grace is said to have once dwelled in the eyes of the inhabitants of the lands between. Perhaps it's as simple as saying that our regular two eyes can see fate, and we can end this conversation here. But if our regular two eyes can see fate and be used to make prophecies, then why is everybody blind? Why do we see so many depictions of a third eye? Grace dwells within these two eyes, but perhaps it's possible that it also dwells within the third eye, the rune. The symbols on Azur and Lusat's foreheads, along with the Preceptor's mask, have golden rune symbolism. What's inside Estelle's forehead looks kind of like a Lord's rune. Rykard fed himself to the serpent, great rune and all, and we see the serpent devouring the middle of his forehead, where the third eye is usually depicted as being. While not specifically depicting the third eye, Corrin's cartwheel and Goldmask's mask have golden rune symbolism, suggesting that their heads are runes. Plus, when we recollect our dropped runes, they return to the center of our forehead. Marika's scar and soreseals are eyes and have the same design as her headband, suggesting that her head is equivalent to an eye. Her headband comes to a point exactly where her third eye would be. If you subscribe to the Jar Saint theory, Marika was likely a Jar Shaman, and the Jar Shamans have a third eye symbol on their foreheads. Corrin, Goldmask, and Marika are all blind, and this symbolism could be hinting at what they are really using to see. In addition to this visual evidence, I previously suggested that our runes are functionally equivalent to something else that resides within our head. Our runes may represent our soul, our memory, our brain, and our consciousness. In the Tree of Memories video, I suggested that the runes are Elden Ring's equivalent of the soul items from Dark Souls, thus the rune may represent our soul. I also suggested that because lowercase r runes represent our experience points, we can call them memories. The rune items grow in size as we accumulate more experience, more memories, because they are the vessels for our runes, the vessels for our memory. In real life, the brain is the vessel for our memory, and thus the rune could be said to represent our brain. We elaborated on this idea in the Runes Are Stars video, where I suggested that the runes represent the brain's regressive process of making meaning from sensory inputs. That is, they represent the process of consciousness. Bloodborne explicitly connects the inner eyes to the brain. The item which mentions eyes on the inside is the third umbilical cord, and we can find a few of these cords in the game. One of them, Yosefka's cord, describes how Provost Willem sought the cord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a great one, by lining his brain with eyes. It may sound too reductive to say that the runes represent all the following things: our two eyes, our third eye, our brain, our consciousness, our memory, our mind, and our soul. But ever since Demon Souls, souls have been memories, eyes, and the mind. The opening line of the intro cutscene for Demon Souls says, "On the first day, man was granted a soul, and with it, clarity." You need your soul to be able to see and think and have a self and be alive. Eyes are the windows to the soul, after all. Credit and thank you to Antediluvian Girl for this piece of evidence. I have an explanation for how the grace which dwells within our two eyes comes to dwell within our third eye, our mind's eye. In real life, light enters our eyes through our pupils and activates light sensors in our retinas. These sensory inputs are then unified into one seamless visualization of our external reality within our brain. Grace is described as golden light, and like regular light, I think it pools into a unified experience within our consciousness. In the last two videos, Tree of Memories and Runes Are Stars, people have commented on how the runes can't represent the brain because they are so clearly meant to represent eyes. The rune representing the third eye is my best explanation for how we can reconcile these two ideas. However, besides just regular light, it seems like there's also something else, some knowledge of the future, an element of fate, which also pools into the rune. And this is what makes it possible to fight while blind. I had mentioned that instead of saying that the rune is the third eye, it may be more accurate to say that the rune occupies the third eye. In our eye, the pupil is the central black hole through which light is let in. Our rune objects also have a central black hole, around which this golden stuff gathers. This central black hole may function as the pupil. and may be the part of the rune which actually sees fate. The golden stuff gathering around the black hole are lowercase r runes, which we have described as experience, memory, and knowledge. Most generally, maybe we can just call runes some form of information. The black hole at the center of the rune is that which sees the golden information. I think whatever exactly allows the blind to see is part of this golden information. I originally had some 2,000 words written diving into the nature of this information, but that ended up being such a deep rabbit hole that I chose to bail and save that discussion for another video. In lieu of my thoughts on the subject, I would love to hear what you think in the comments below. One issue with figuring out what the element of information is that allows one to see fate is that we don't totally understand how fate works. Is the future predetermined or not? Characters like Ronnie and Mikola do have a fate, but they are actively fighting against it. The guidance of grace is there to guide us along the proper path, but we don't have to follow it. This is very close to how fate is described in Berserk. The character Flora says, "God bestows upon us fate, but it is the children of men who choose it." All that I do know is that these enemies that we fight really do have the ability to fight while blind. They are receiving information about the world around them that doesn't require their eyes, likely via their third eye. Another issue with this theory that we need to address is that the runes are specifically said to be grace, an idea that we associate with the Elden Ring and Erd Tree. However, the ancestral followers have third eye symbolism, and their culture is said to exist outside the purview of the Erd Tree. You could maybe explain this by saying that we still get runes from ancestral followers, and the regal ancestor spirit remembrance is hewn into the Erd Tree. But I also have evidence, which we'll discuss in the next video, suggesting that the knowledge of how to fight while blind dates back to Ra, which was definitely pre-Erd Tree. The best explanation I have is that in these older ages, the black hole pupil was still being used for blind sight, but the stuff pooling into it may not have been gold, but instead was a substance of a different nature. The whole point of this video is to suggest that the third eye can see fate, and that a contender for the third eye is the rune. If you're with me on this, I would like to demonstrate how I think this works, why golden thread is used to symbolize fate, and why Radagon is associated with being a tailor. As we discussed in the Runes Are Stars video, at every point in time, there's a regressive process converging the many electrical signals of the neurons in your brain into something called consciousness. This is what your brain is doing at this very moment as you watch this video. We can use the rune to symbolize this process, and plot the present moment in the middle of this time plot here. The present moment is the convergence of sensory stimuli into consciousness, but as we pass from one moment to the next, the previous moment becomes memory. If you were to plot every moment of someone's life on the x-axis here and went to the very last point, the moment of their death, looking back, you could say that this plot represents the entirety of their memories. From this perspective, it looks a bit like a golden thread, don't you think? In many mythologies, fate is symbolized by a golden thread. The thread is spun, manipulated, and eventually cut by a trio of goddesses known as the Fates. The Fates were beings beyond time, capable of visualizing a human's entire life, all their memories. Because fate is everything that happens to you while you are alive. It is the totality of your memories from birth to death. This plot represents the totality of a person's memories across their lifetime, recorded as individual moments of the regression of sensory stimuli into conscious experience. This plot represents fate. Radagon is associated with being a tailor. He possessed golden tailoring tools and a gold sewing needle. Note that the eye of the needle is threaded with golden thread. Radagon ordered the Carian preceptors to don the Mask of Confidence, which has its mouth sewn shut with gold thread in a design akin to Radagon's seal. Radagon, who represents regression, sews with the golden thread. The key to understanding why Radagon sews with the golden thread is to understand that each time point in this plot represents an act of regression. If you visualize sewing this golden thread into a piece of fabric, you could say that each stitch is being stitched by a process of regression. Each moment of reality you experience as a thinking, conscious human is being woven into the fabric of space-time by the act of regression that is your consciousness. This is your fate, and it's a golden thread. Ultimately, the reason why a golden thread is used to represent fate is simply for convenience. It's just a metaphor to express a metaphysical idea that cannot easily be described or visualized otherwise. The rune is the third eye, so let's replace each moment of this plot with an eye. I think that the mechanism of how to see into fate involves looking into this golden thread, this stream of memories. I like to think of this plot as being like a fiber optic cable, through which one can see into the future or the past, through which one can see through time. However, just like there's a horizon past which we cannot see when looking across space, there may also be a horizon past which we cannot see when looking across time. It may be that the folks who are well practiced in predicting the future have increased their ability to see into time, and thus into fate, and this is how they make their prophecies. Like the fates are beings beyond time and can see all of fate, there's a being in the game who is beyond time who may also be able to see all of fate, Placidusax. The evidence for this is that we must go to Placidusax's arena to use Miquella's needle, the needle which allows one to cheat fate and avoid becoming the Lord of Frenzied Flame. I think the reason why we can do this is that we essentially go beyond time, restitch our own thread, and rewrite our fate. We are emulating the same power that the goddesses of fate possess. Placidusax may also have some ability to influence fate. After all, the Dragon King's Cragblade is shaped like a needle. And Placidusax himself is sitting in the center of an arena that is shaped like a giant eye. It may not only be him, but other ancient dragons too. Ancient dragon scales lightly twist time, which may give them some ability to see across time, and thus into fate. Though officially called spears, many of the dragon lightning incantations are shaped like needles. The Bolt of Grandsax is shaped like a needle. If a needle represents the ability to weave fate, perhaps this has something to do with why Grandsax stabbed Dell. Not everyone who is blind has the ability to use their third eye to see. For example, the nomadic merchants appear to be blind, but they use their instrument bow as a support cane to walk around. It seems like learning to see with one's third eye is a difficult task, and those who learn to do so are rare. The images you see with your mind's eye are mental representations of sensory inputs. The less input you have from your other senses, the easier it is to focus on these mental representations. This is why so many characters purposefully blind themselves. Errant Sorcerer Wilhelm seems to have been the most extreme. He wears a blindfold, was a silent seeker of sorcery, and hung out in Hermit's village on Mount Gelmir, presumably alone, hence the name. His Staff of Loss is wielded by sorcerers who believe that discovery comes through acts of asceticism. Asceticism is self-denial, abstinence. All these characters are practicing a form of asceticism. They cut off the outside world so that they can focus on the inner one. One strategy to learn to see with one's third eye seems to be the path of asceticism, but I think there may be another. It may be that suffering is another way that one can open their third eye. In spiritual traditions, an intense personal hardship can trigger a profound spiritual awakening, allowing a person to access deeper levels of perception and intuition. There's also modern research showing that people who have near-death experiences record a profound mental shift or change in consciousness afterwards. It may be that an immense amount of pain, mental or physical, can cause one's awareness to become heightened and changed. This phenomenon may be what opening the third eye refers to. I think we see this playing out in the game. I reasoned briefly towards the end of the Tree of Memories video that suffering may lead to an increase of consciousness. As is suggested by the Tooth Whip, the shamans were whipped, aka tortured, which perhaps increased their level of consciousness and made it easier for their spirit to meld with the spirits of others. The shamans we see in the jars have their eyes covered, and they have a carving in the middle of their foreheads where their third eye would be. We touch Hyetta's forehead where her third eye would be, and then we watch her go through the incredibly painful experience of having her eyes burned out, after which she's able to practice divination and prophecy. The prophet set is made from rough fabric that scrapes against the skin like a sharpening file, which sounds rather painful. This set is worn by exiled prophets that were persecuted and driven from their homes. Even after his exile, Corrin refused to recant his prophecies, and for this he was blessed with the guidance of grace. Corrin went through a painful experience, after which he was blessed with the ability to see into fate. We know that many Tarnished do not have the ability to see Grace's guidance. Perhaps this is only something that can be achieved through pain, by opening one's third eye. Yet we, a Tarnished of no renown, have this ability. Perhaps this is because we have to go through a painful experience to start the game. The game begins with the death of our maiden, and then we are forced to die. When we awake, we have the ability to see the guidance of grace. The Thorn Sorcerers had their eyes gouged out by thorns, a painful experience, and it was afterwards that they discovered the blood star within them. If runes are stars and the rune is the third eye, then perhaps we can say that this is a reference to how they opened their third eye. And one last fun one, the fire giant rips off his foot in order to open his eye, which is technically a third eye. Pain often comes from loss. As described by the Staff of Loss, asceticism is a form of loss. Putting these two ideas together, you could say that what causes the third eye to open is loss. There's more to be discovered about the nature of what can be seen in the darkness within us using one's third eye, and we will continue to do so in future videos. If you enjoyed this video and feel that it contributes positively to the Elden Ring community, please leave a like to help boost its visibility within YouTube's algorithm. If you enjoy my content in general, please subscribe. My fellow Tarnished, thank you so much for watching. See you in the next video.